In this video, you're going to learn how to create this badass tooltip component using Quasar 2 and Vue 3 from scratch. And this tooltip takes Quasar's default tooltip component and supercharges it with a big chunky design, a nice drop shadow, arrows that we can place in 3 different places on the top, 3 different places on the bottom, and 3 different places on the left and right as well. We can also programmatically trigger this tooltip and hide it, and we can also hide it after a delay. And we can even add a close button to it, which the user can click to close the tooltip. And we can also customize the background and text colors of our tooltip with any of the colors in our current theme or the Quasar color palette. So in this series, I'm documenting my journey creating a real-world Quasar app, Fudget 2, from scratch using Quasar 2 and Vue 3, an app that will ultimately be deployed to the iOS, Android, Mac and Windows app stores. And this week, not much has changed in the app aside from adding this tooltip component. So I'm using these tooltips to help the user get started in the app. So we see one here when the app first starts up, and when they click this button, we see another one here with an arrow at the bottom. Then after the user types something in, we see another one down here with an arrow on the top right. And when they click on create, we see another tooltip with an arrow at the top middle, telling the user what to do next. So since not much has changed in the app this week, let's make this video a tutorial video where I show you how to create this tooltip component from scratch in a new Quasar 2 Vue 3 project. Make sure you click subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss any of the videos in this series, and you can find the link to the whole playlist in the description. Let's get started by creating a new Quasar 2 and Vue 3 project. So I'm going to go to the Quasar site, quasar.dev, and at the time I'm recording this, Quasar version 2 is still in beta, so I'm going to jump to this red link, jump to Quasar CLI and install Quasar CLI. And if you don't have the Quasar CLI installed, you'll need to install it with one of these commands in your terminal. And once that's installed, we can create a new project with the Quasar create command. So I'm just going to make sure I'm in the folder where I keep all my projects, and I'm going to run Quasar create. Let's call it Quasar-badass-tooltip. And because Quasar 2 is still in beta, I'm going to add --branch next. But you might not need to do that if Quasar 2 is out of beta. But I'm going to add branch next. And I'm going to leave the project name. And for the product name, I'll put badass tooltip. And I'll leave the description. And for the author, I'll just put my name. And I'm going to use Sass with SCSS syntax for the CSS preprocessor. I'm going to disable ESLint for the purposes of this tutorial, although you might want to consider using that on your own projects. And we don't need to enable anything else here, so I'm just going to hit enter. And I'm going to choose yes, use npm to install the dependencies. Okay, it's finished creating our project, and we can start it by just running Quasar dev. And I can see the folder it's created here, so I'm going to drag that into VS Code and open up the terminal and just run Quasar dev. And we can now see our project running in the browser. And before we start creating our component, let's just tidy some things up. So I'm going to jump to source and layouts and main layout.vue. And I'm going to change the title here to badass tooltip. And I'll get rid of this div with the Quasar version and save that. And I'm also going to get rid of the draw so we have more space to work with. So I'm going to select all of the Q draw and just get rid of that. And we're not going to need any of this essential link stuff now. So I'm going to remove this import and this links list. And I'll remove this components object. And I'll just remove everything inside this setup function and save that. And I'll also delete the essential link component in the components folder. Get rid of that. Right, now let's create our badass tooltip component. Okay, so I'm going to jump to the components folder and create a new file called tooltip.vue. Then I'll scaffold a Vue file using the Vita extension. And to begin with, we're just going to add one of Quasar's default tooltip components in here. So if we go to the Quasar site and Vue components and tooltip, so we're just going to add one of these components. And if we go to Vue source we can just add one of these like this. So I'm going to copy that and paste it inside our template, fix the indentation. We want to be able to pass any text we want down to this component. So I'm going to replace this text here with a slot component so that any text we place inside our tooltip component will be passed inside this QTooltip component. So I'm going to save that and I'm going to jump to our page component, which is in source, pages and index.view. And I'll get rid of this image here. And instead we'll add a Q button component. And actually we won't give that self-closing tags. We'll give it a closing tag so that we can place our tooltip inside it. And I'll set the label to show a badass tooltip. And I'll set the color to primary. And we want to place our tooltip component inside this Q button component because that's how we use the default Quasar tooltip. We place it inside elements like you can see here in this example. So first we need to import that component. So I'm going to add a components object here. And for the HTML tag, we'll just use the tag tooltip. I'm going to set this to require default. And then I'm going to pass the path to our component in here. So that's going to be at components/tooltip. We don't need to add the .view. So I'll save that. We should be able to place a tooltip component inside this Q button. We'll stick some text in there. I am so badass. And we'll save that. I'll reload the page. And hopefully if we hover over this button, we can see a tooltip component. Now, any props that we add to this tooltip component will be passed directly down to this QTooltip component, which means that any of the default props that we can use on a QTooltip component, so any of these props in the API section here, we can add directly to our tooltip and it will be passed down to this QTooltip component. So to make it easier for us to style our tooltip, I'd like it to just stay permanently visible. So if we jump to the model section, we can just set the model value prop to true to make this permanently visible. So I'm just going to break this up onto multiple lines and we'll set the model value prop to true and save that. We can now see it permanently on the screen. And just to make sure it doesn't disappear when we hover off the button component, I'm also going to add another prop. I'm going to jump to behavior and we can add this no parent event prop, which skips attaching events to the target DOM element, which in this case is this button. So I'm going to add this prop as well. So no parent event, save that, reload. Now the tooltip stays there all the time, even if we hover off and on this button. So now it's going to be much easier for us to style this guy and add colors, drop shadow, arrows, and all that good stuff. So before we start adding arrows and stuff like that, let's just style up the basic box and the text. Add some big chunky text, some border radius and some drop shadow and a nice background color. So while we're doing this, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit and reload. And I'd like to have a nice opaque dark gray background by default for our tooltip. So I'm going to jump to the Quasar site, go to style and identity and color palette. And I'll scroll down to the grays and this gray 10 class should be good. So I'm going to jump to tooltip.view and I'll add a class to this QTooltip of bg-gray-10 and save that. And this is nice and dark and opaque now. And I'd like the text to be a bit bigger. So I'm going to jump back to the Quasar site, style and identity and typography. And this text body1 class should do the trick. That's nice and big. So I'm also going to add that class to this QTooltip text-body1, save that, and I'll just reload the page. And I'd also like this text to be bold, so I'm going to add text-bold as well. And we see some nice bold text. And I also want to add a nice box shadow and some more pronounced rounded corners and a bit more padding as well. So I'm going to add a class to this QTooltip of tooltip so that we can add some more styles. And in the style block, I'm going to set the lang to SCSS and we'll target this tooltip. Okay, let's add the box shadow first. So let's add box shadow and add like a nice blurry box shadow, which just starts from the center. So I'm going to set the horizontal to 0 and the vertical to 0, but I'll set the blur to 30 pixels and I'll set the spread to 0. And for the color, we'll use RGBA, and we'll add 0 red, 0 green, and 0 blue. And then we'll add 0.5 for the opacity, and I'll save that. And we now have a nice box shadow. And I'm going to make the corners a bit more rounded. So I'm going to set the border radius to 10 pixels. And we need to add a semicolon there. And I'd also like a bit more padding. So I'm going to set the padding to 20 pixels. Save that. And reload. And this is looking pretty good. Let's add some arrows to this sucker. Okay, let's add an arrow to this box. And you may have seen arrows added to boxes using the after pseudo selector, such as in this example on CodePen here. So this is using the after pseudo selector to add these arrows by manipulating the borders of that after pseudo selector. But because we have this drop shadow on our tooltip, this isn't going to work for us. So if I scroll up to this box selector, which is selecting this box here, if we add our drop shadow to that, just paste that in there, then that looks kind of okay. But if we add the same drop shadow to the after pseudo selector, then it doesn't work. We can clearly see the square edge of this pseudo selector, and we can also see some drop shadow up here on the box as well. So we're going to do it slightly differently from that. We're actually just going to create a div for our arrow, and we're going to rotate that so that the corner of that square becomes our arrow. So after our default slot here, I'm going to add a div with a class of tooltip-arrow, and I'll give it the same background color as our box, so bg-gray-10. And we're going to position this absolutely, so I'll also add a class of absolute and save that. And let's add some styles to this arrow. So I'm going to add and-arrow to select this div. And we'll give it a width of 30 pixels and a height of 30 pixels. We can't actually see that right now, because if I inspect this QTooltip, which has actually been added at the end of the body here in this div. So if we scroll down through the styles, we can see the overflow X is set to hidden and the overflow Y is set to auto. So I'm going to override these by adding overflow visible to the tooltip and save that. And I'll just hide the Chrome DevTools and reload that. Okay, let's rotate this box by 45 degrees so that we have a point that we can use as our arrow. So I'm going to add transform to this arrow, and I'll set rotate to -45 degrees. Save that. And we now have a nice point. But let's place this first arrow at the top in the center. So I'm going to add a top property and set that to 0. And to place it in the center, I'm going to set the left property to 50%. And then to pull it back 50% to put it in the middle, I'm going to add to this transform property, I'll add translate X, which allows us to move things around on the X axis. And we'll set this to 0, 50%. Save that. And it's now in the middle. And to make this arrow a little bit pointier, I'm going to use the skew transform as well. So I'll add skew. And I'm going to set this to -20 degrees, comma, -20 degrees. Save that. Let's add the same box shadow that we used on our box. So rather than repeating this, let's put this in a variable. So I'll create a variable called box shadow. And I'll cut this and paste it here. And we'll just use our variable here. And we'll copy this and add it to our arrow as well. Save that. And we can now see the shadow on our arrow as well. However, you can see that this squished and rotated box is now covering up our text. So let's now place this arrow behind the box. Let's place this arrow behind the box so it's not obscuring our text. So what we're going to do here is set up another div for our text. And we'll move all of our box styles to that new div, and then use Z-index to place the text div above the arrow div. So I'm going to surround this slot here where our text is displayed in a div with a class of tooltip-text. So I'll move that slot up there and save that. And we're going to move all of these styles from the Q tooltip to this div. So I'm going to cut these classes here, these color and text classes, and add them to this div and save that. However, we can now see some remnants from the Q tooltip styles here. We can see this semi-transparent gray background. So on the tooltip, I'm going to set background to transparent, and then I'm going to move all of our box styles, the box shadow, border radius, and padding to our tooltip text div. So I'll add a selector for that. So and dash text, and we'll move these three properties down into the text div, save that. And I think the Q tooltip has some default padding on it. So I'm going to set the padding on the tooltip to 0. Just reload to make sure that's working all right. Okay, let's use Z-index to place the arrow div behind the text div. And in order to use Z-index, our element needs to be either absolutely positioned or relatively positioned. So I'm going to add a class of relative-position to the tooltip text div, save that, and we'll add a Z-index to this text div of 10. And then for the arrow div, we'll add a lower Z-index, so we'll set that to 5, save that. And we can see the arrow is now behind the box. However, we do have a little issue here. It's quite hard to see when the tooltip is so dark. So just temporarily, I'm just going to change these background classes to bg-red. Save that. So you can see the drop shadow from the text div can be seen on the arrow, which doesn't look too great because I want this to look like all one shape, the box and the arrow. So what we can do is just move this box shadow, which is on the text div, back onto the tooltip div. So I'll move this up to here, save that. And this is all looking like one shape again. However, we can see some white borders there, which are coming from the Q tooltip component. So I'm just going to add the same border radius property to the tooltip selector here. So I'll add border radius 10, save that. And this is looking pretty good. Before we move on, I'm just going to set this BG red class back to BG-gray-10, save that. Okay, so we have our first arrow working. Let's add some more arrows to this guy. It would be good if we could display an arrow at the top left and the top right of this box, as well as in the top middle. So let's set up some classes for managing that. So first, let's set up a class for adding this top middle arrow that we've already done. So I'm going to add a class to the Q tooltip of tooltip-arrow-top, and I'll save that. And so we want to select this tooltip arrow div when its parent has this tooltip arrow-top class. So inside this arrow selector here, I'm going to add .tooltip-arrow-top. And then I'll add an and symbol. So that and symbol is basically going to select this element here when its parent has this class of tooltip-arrow-top. And so we now want to move the properties which are positioning this arrow at the top center down into this selector here. So that's the top and left properties. So I'm going to move them down into this selector here. So let's save that and make sure it's still working. Yep, our arrow is still at the top and in the middle. So let's set up a class for a top left arrow, which will be displayed over here. So I'll change this class that we added to tooltip arrow top dash left and save that. And I'll just duplicate this tooltip arrow top selector and change this to tooltip arrow top dash left and save that. And we don't want to position this in the center, we want it over on the left. So I'm going to change this left property value to, let's try 0 pixels, save that. And that's a bit too far to the left, so let's try 20 pixels, maybe a little bit more. Let's try 30 pixels. And that looks pretty good. Okay, let's set up an arrow for the top right now. So I'll change this class here to tooltip arrow top dash right, save that. And I'll duplicate this top left selector, change it to top right, And we want this over on the right. So I'm going to get rid of this left property and instead add a right property, set that to 0. And that's looking pretty good. And we have the same top property on all of these arrows. So let's remove that duplication by using a attribute selector, which will select any elements which have a class containing tooltip arrow dash top, thereby selecting all of these 3 classes here. So what we can do here, I'm just going to add a comment here which says top arrows. We could add square brackets here. And we're going to use an attribute selector. And we're going to target the class attribute. So we'll add class star equals, and we'll add tooltip dash arrow dash top. So this is going to select all elements which have a class which contains this phrase here. So this is going to select this class, and this class as well. So then we can just add our top 0 here and remove that from the other 3 selectors and save that. And that's not working because we also need to add the and symbol here because this class is going to be on the parent QTooltip component and not on this arrow div. So we'll save that, and that seems to be working. Let's just make sure all of our top arrows are working. So with the class of tooltip arrow top, we see an arrow at the top center, and if we add dash left, we see an arrow on the left, and if we add dash right, we see an arrow on the top right. Let's set up some bottom arrows now. So I'm going to change this class on our tooltip to tooltip arrow dash bottom, save that. And then I'm going to duplicate all of these top arrows, styles, and rename this comment to bottom arrows, and change this attribute selector here to arrow dash bottom, and change these to bottom as well, and save that. And we don't want these arrows at the top, we want them at the bottom. So I'm going to change this top 0 to bottom 0, save that. And that arrow is now at the bottom. So let's see if our bottom left and bottom right classes work. So I'll add dash left, and that looks okay, and dash right, and that looks good too. Okay, let's set up some arrows for the left hand side now. So I'll change this class here to tooltip arrow dash left, and I'm just going to copy these first 2 selectors and this comment, paste them here, change the comment to left arrows, and change this class here to dash left, and also change this selector here to dash left. So we want this arrow over here, and we're going to have to rotate it differently so that these pointy arrows are on the left and right hand side of that div instead of at the bottom and top of that div. So I'm going to copy this transform property from our arrow selector, and I'll paste that in here. And instead of minus 45 degrees, we're going to rotate this 45 degrees. And we want this position right on the left. So I'm going to change this left 50% to left 0. And we no longer want to use translate X to put this in the horizontal center. We want to use translate Y to put it in the vertical center. So I'm going to change this translate X to translate Y and save that. We also want to get rid of this bottom property and instead set the top to 50%, save that. And that looks like it's right in the vertical center there. So let's create some arrows for the left top and the left bottom as well. So I'm going to change this class here to left dash top, save that. We'll create that class here. So tooltip dash arrow dash left dash top, and then our and symbol. Let's set the top to 0 to put it at the top, and that's a little bit too far, so let's try 20 pixels, and that looks pretty good. So let's duplicate this and set up our tooltip arrow left bottom class for an arrow that's at the bottom, and we'll change that class here to dash bottom, save that. We want this positioned at the bottom, so we'll set the bottom to 0. And that's not working because we still have this top 50% being applied to all of these classes. So let's move that down to our default left arrow in the middle selector. Maybe we need to set this bottom property to a negative value. So let's try minus 20 pixels. That's too far. Let's try minus 10 pixels. That looks pretty good. So let's make sure all of these left arrows are working. So tooltip arrow left gives us an arrow on the left in the middle. Tooltip arrow left dash top gives us a left top arrow. And bottom gives us a left bottom arrow. So let's change this class to dash right and set up some arrows for the right hand side. So I'll duplicate these left arrows styles and replace left with right, and I'll replace left with right here as well, and in all of these selectors. I'll save that, and we want this on the right. So let's change this left 0 to right 0, and that's over on the right. Let's see if right top and right bottom work okay. So right dash top, and that's not working. And that's because we need to move this right property up to this general selector, which is selecting all of these. Let's try that again. We should probably do the same here actually. I'll move this left property up to that one. Okay, so let's see if right bottom is working. Let's just check the default right one again. That's okay. Let's just double check our left ones. So left and then left dash top, left dash bottom. Okay, they're all working now. Let's set up a prop for our tooltip so that we can easily change the position of the arrow. So when we use our tooltip, we can add a prop such as arrow and set this to top right, and we'll see an arrow up here. And for now, I'm just going to remove this and jump back to tooltip.vue, and we'll set up this prop. So we need to add a props object, and we're going to add a prop called arrow. This is going to be a string, so we'll set the type to string. Let's set a default value in case the user doesn't provide the arrow prop. So we'll set the default to top. And instead of hard coding this arrow class here on the QTooltip, we'll cut that and we'll bind to the class attribute, and we'll output tooltip-arrow- and then whatever's been provided in this prop. So I'll just add $ curly braces and then arrow, and save that. And you can see if we don't provide the arrow prop, we do see the top arrow by default. So let's jump back to index.vue and see if we can place the arrow in our 12 different possible places. So I'll add this arrow prop, and I'm back on index.vue here. So let's add the top value, and that's working. Let's try top left. That's working. Top right. Let's try the bottom ones. So bottom, bottom left, bottom right. Let's try the left arrows. So left is working, left top is working, left bottom. Let's try the right. The right arrow is working, right top is working, and right bottom is working too. Now if we jump back to the QTooltip page on the Quasar site, so components and tooltip, then this component has some positioning properties such as anchor and self. So anchor determines the position of the tooltip relative to its target element or component, and the self prop determines the position of the tooltip itself. And with these props, we can actually pass in two separate words such as top space left and top space middle without needing to add the dash that we currently need to add with this prop. So let's use a computed property so that we can do the same thing with this prop, so that we can pass in something like right bottom like that. And I'll just put that dash back in for now, and we'll jump back to tooltip.vue. Let's set up a computed property. So we're going to need our setup function, and we're going to need to pass in our props so we can get access to them. And I'm just going to add a block comment here which says arrow class, and we'll set up a computed property called arrow class. So I'll add const arrow class equals computed, and we need to import the computed method from Vue. So we'll import computed from Vue. And so if the user passes in something like right space bottom, then we want to replace that space with a dash. So I'll set up a variable here called arrow class corrected. And what we'll do is grab the value in this arrow prop and replace any spaces with dashes. So we can just set this to props.arrow.replace. We want to replace any spaces with dashes like that. And for now, we'll just return this. So return arrow class corrected. And we also need to return this computed property at the end of our setup function. So I'm going to add another block comment here for our return statement. We just want to return this arrow class computed property. And instead of spitting out our prop here, let's spit out this arrow class computed property. So I'll change this to arrow class and save that. And let's see if that's working. So if we add right dash bottom, that's still working. But if we put a space here instead of the dash, then hopefully that's still working, and it is. Let's just try a few others. So top left, top right, and yeah, that all seems to be working. And we should probably add some error handling to this in case the user enters a value here which is not going to work, such as top center or something like that. So I'll just undo this and jump back to our computed property. And after this arrow class corrected variable, I'm going to set up a variable with all of the allowed classes. So we'll call this allowed classes, set this equal to an array, and we'll just add all of the allowed classes here. So we got top and top left and top right. Then we got bottom, bottom left, bottom dash right. Then we got left and left dash top and left dash bottom. Then we've got right, right dash top and right dash bottom. And I think that's all of them. And then we can just check if this array includes this arrow class corrected class. And if it doesn't, then we can return an error. So we can do if not allowed classes dot includes arrow class corrected. So if what the user has entered here after it's been corrected and the dash is put back in is not included in this array, then we want to return an error. So we could just do console.error, and I'll use a template string here. So we could just output something like value and then quotes, and then we'll spit out the value they've provided. So arrow class corrected. So value and then the value they've provided, not allowed for arrow prop. And I'll put that in quotes as well, arrow. Use one of these, and then I'll put brackets with or without dashes. And then we can just output our array of allowed classes. So allowed classes. And if what the user entered in the prop after it's been corrected is in this array, then we'll skip over this if, and we'll just return the arrow class corrected. So I'll just save that and make sure this is working. So I'll open up the console, and if we provide something here that's not going to work, such as top center, save that. Then we can see that error. Value top center, not allowed for arrow prop. Use one of these with or without dashes. And then we see all of the possible options. Let's just make sure this is still working with correct props. So top, that's working. Top left, it's working. Top right, and yeah, they all seem to be working. Let's add a bunch of buttons to our page so we can showcase all of our different tooltips so far. So I'm just going to reset my zoom to 100%. I'm going to get rid of these flex classes on the Q page and just add a padding class so we have a bit of padding. So Q-PA-MD, and I'll save that. And let's stick a heading at the top here. So I'll add a div with a class of text-h5. And I'll just put top arrows in here, save that. And let's add some margin to our button as well. So I'll add a class of Q-MA-LG and save that. So let's showcase our top arrow first. So I'll change the label in this button to top arrow, and I'll change this arrow prop to top. And to make this appear when we hover over the button, I'm going to remove the model value prop and the no parent event prop as well. Save that. Okay, let's duplicate this button and change the label to top left arrow on the button, and change the arrow prop to top left. Save that, and that's working. Let's duplicate this button, change the label to top right arrow, change the arrow prop on the tooltip to top right. So we can now see all of our different top arrows. So let's duplicate these 3 buttons and that heading. We'll add a heading which says bottom arrows. Save that. And I'll add a bit of top margin to this heading. So Q-MT-MD, maybe LG actually. Save that. So on the first button, I'll change the label on the button to bottom arrow, change the arrow prop to bottom, and then we'll do bottom left arrow and bottom left for the prop, and then bottom right arrow and bottom right for the prop. Save that. We can see the arrows, but since these arrows are now at the bottom, we probably want to position this tooltip above the button instead of below it. We can do that with the tooltips positioning props. So we can use this anchor prop and this self prop. So we probably want to set this anchor prop to top middle. So let's just try that out on the first tooltip here. So we'll set the anchor to top middle, save that. We also want to use the self prop, which I think we want to set to bottom middle. So let's see how that looks. Bottom middle, save that. And that prop should be called self and not bottom. So I'll change that to self. And that's looking good now. So let's add the same props to these other 2 tooltips. So I'll add those here and here. Save that. And we can now see all of our bottom arrows. So let's showcase the left and right arrows. So I'm going to copy this heading, paste it down to the bottom. And I'll just copy this button and tooltip, change the heading to left and right arrows, paste that button and tooltip there, save that, change the label to left arrow, save that. We probably want this tooltip positioned over to the right of the button. So I think we want to set this anchor prop to center end. So we'll set this anchor prop to center end. And of course we want to set our arrow to left, save that. And we also want to set this self prop as well. I think we want to set that to center start, and that's looking pretty good. So let's duplicate that and add our right arrow. So I'll change the label on the button to right arrow, change the arrow to right. And we want to set the anchor to center start, I think. And we want to set the self prop to center end. Save that. And that's looking pretty good. And I'm not going to add the left top, left bottom, right top, right bottom buttons, but feel free to do that if you want to. And if you found this video useful so far, do me a favor and smash the like button. I'll leave a comment telling me if you would have created these tooltips differently. Let's add a programmatically triggered tooltip to this showcase page. So I'm just going to copy one of these headings and paste it at the bottom. We'll change the heading to programmatically triggered. And I'm just going to copy the first Q button and tooltip, paste it down here. And I'll change the label on the button to click to toggle tooltip, save that. Right now, this tooltip is going to show every time we hover over this button. So to stop it doing that, we can use the prop we used before, no parent event on this tooltip, save that. And we now no longer see the tooltip when we hover over the button. And if we want to show this programmatically, all we need to do is add a V model to this tooltip. And when the value of that V model is false, then it won't be shown. But when it's true, then the tooltip will be shown. So let's jump down to our script section. We'll add our setup function. We'll set up a ref variable here. So we'll add let show tooltip equals ref. And we'll set this to false by default. And we need to return this, show tooltip. And we also need to import the ref method from Vue. So I'll add that here. And now we can just set the vmodel of our tooltip to this ref here. So I'll add a vmodel to this tooltip and set it to show tooltip. Save that. Refresh. So if we set this value here to true, then we should see the tooltip, which we do. So I'll set that back to false. And we'll just add a click handler to this button here. So at click, and we'll just set this show tooltip ref to the opposite of itself. So if it's false, set it to true, and if it's true, set it to false. So we can just do show tooltip equals the opposite of show tooltip. Save that. And hopefully we can toggle this now. So we'll click on the button and we see the tooltip. I'll click again and we see the tooltip disappear. Let's create a tooltip which disappears after a delay that we specify with a new prop. Now there is a prop on Quasar's tooltip component, this hide delay prop, which will make the tooltip disappear after a delay. However, it doesn't work if we're showing our tooltip programmatically like we are in our latest tooltip here. So if I add this hide delay prop to this tooltip and set it to 2000 and save that, and we show the tooltip, then the tooltip never disappears. So this prop only seems to work when we're showing our tooltips on hover like the rest of our buttons. So if I cut this prop and put it on the previous tooltip, save that. So that's this one here. And this hide delay only kicks in after we move away from the target element. So if I move the cursor away, then after 2 seconds, the tooltip disappears. But I'd like to be able to make our tooltip disappear after a delay, even on programmatically triggered tooltips like this one. So let's set up our own prop. So I'm going to jump back to tooltip.vue and we'll add a new prop called duration. And this is going to be a number. So I'll set the type to number and we'll set the default value to null because we don't want it to disappear after a delay by default. And let's add a new button to our page. So I'll duplicate this bottom button and let's set up a new ref for showing this tooltip. So I'll set up another ref here called show tooltip with hide. We'll set that to false by default and we'll return it at the end here, show tooltip with hide. And we'll set the vmodel on this tooltip to show tooltip with hide. And I'll change the label on this button to hide tooltip after delay. And we'll update the click handler as well. And we'll just set show tooltip with hide equal to true to show the tooltip. So let's make this guy hide after a delay, which we'll pass in like this, duration equals 2000, save that, and I'll jump back to tooltip.vue. So we're going to need a set timeout with the duration set to the duration being passed in with this prop. So after this tooltip is shown, we want to start that set timeout, and when that finishes, we want to hide this tooltip. However, we can't just add this set timeout to this setup function directly, because this setup function will be triggered for all of our tooltips straight away when the page loads. So just to demonstrate that, I'm just going to log out setup and save that and show the console. So if I just reload the page, so we can see setup is being logged out 10 times for all of our tooltips. And we seem to have a warning here from our layout. Toggle left draw was accessed during render, but not defined on instance. So I'm just going to open up main layout.vue and search for toggle left draw. Yeah, it's a click handler on this button. Let's just remove that button actually, we're not going to need it. And I'll save that and close that. And back to these fading out tooltips. So we can't start our set timeout directly in the setup function. We need to wait until the tooltip has actually been shown. And if we jump back to the Tooltip API section and jump to events, then we have this show event which will be triggered when the tooltip is shown. So what we can do is we can add an event listener to this QTooltip. So at show, and then we can fire a method when that event is fired. So we'll fire a method called onShow, and we need to create this method. So I'm just going to add another block comment here, and I'll set that to event onShow. And let's create that method. So const onShow, and we'll set that to a method, an arrow function. For now, we'll just log out onShow. We're going to need to return this method. So we'll add that to our return statement onShow. Let's save that and see if that's working. And I'll just remove that console log we added to the start of the setup function as well. So I'll reload that, clear the console, click on this button, and we can see the onShow method being fired when the tooltip is shown. So let's jump down to that onShow function. So first of all, we want to check that a value has been provided to the duration prop. So we can do if props.duration. And if they have provided a duration, then we want to fire a set timeout function. And we want to set the timeout duration to the value that's in our prop. So props.duration. And when that's done, we want to hide the tooltip. So I'll just log out hide tooltip for now. So I'll save that, reload, clear the console, click on the button. And after a couple of seconds, we see hide tooltip being logged out. But how can we actually hide the tooltip? Well, if we jump back to Quasar's tooltip page and methods, then we have this hide method that we can trigger on the tooltip to hide it. But first we need to get access to the tooltip component. So we're going to have to add a ref to it. So I'll add a ref and we'll call this tooltip ref. And at the top of our setup function, I'm going to add another block comment here, which is called reusables. And we'll set up our ref here. So let tooltip ref equals ref. Set that to null. And actually that should be a const. And we're going to need to return this tooltip ref. So let's add that down here, tooltip ref, and save that. So we can now get access to this QTooltip component at tooltipref.value. So let's jump back to our set timeout in the onShow event. And to get access to the tooltip component, we can do tooltipref.value. And then to hide the tooltip, we just want to fire this hide event. So we can just do tooltipref.value.hide. And hopefully that should do the trick. So I'll save that, reload, and we have an error, ref is not defined. So we need to import ref from vue. So I'll add that to this import statement, save that and reload. And if I click on this button, we should see the tooltip and hopefully see it disappear after 2 seconds, because we're passing in 2000 milliseconds here. So let's see if that's working. And yeah, seems to be working now. Let's just make sure it doesn't disappear if we remove that duration prop. So I'll remove that and save and reload. And yeah, it's not disappearing. So I'll put that prop back in and save that. Let's create a tooltip with a close button that the user can click to get rid of the tooltip. Quasar's own tooltip component doesn't have this functionality, so this is going to be a brand new addition to the component. Okay, so let's jump to tooltip.view and we'll set up a new prop first called, let's call it closable. And this is going to be a Boolean prop, and we'll set the default to false because we don't want the close button added by default. So I'll save that. And we'll jump back to index.view and we'll add another button here. So I'll copy this last button And I'll change the label to tooltip with close button. And we'll set up a new ref for controlling this tooltip. So I'll duplicate this one. And we'll call this show tooltip with close. And we'll also return that in our return statement. Save that. And we'll update the v model to show tooltip with close. And we'll change show tooltip with hide on the click handler to show tooltip with close. And I'm going to get rid of the duration prop. And we'll add this closable prop and save that. Reload and just make sure our tooltip is showing, which it is. So let's jump back to tooltip.view and let's add a close button to this tooltip, but only if the closable prop has been provided. So I'm going to place this inside the div with our text, which is here. So after this slot here, we'll add a Q button. And we only want to display this if the closable prop is true. So we can add v if closable. And I'll set the icon to close, which should give us a nice X icon. And I want this absolutely positioned to the top right of the tooltip. So I'll add a class of absolute top right. Save that. And I want it to be a bit smaller. So let's set the size to SM. And we'll add the dense prop. And we'll also make it round as well with the round prop and save that. Let's see if we can click on that button. And right now we can't click on it. And if we inspect our tooltip, which again is being added to the end of the body tag here, it currently has this no pointer events class, which is removing all pointer events from this tooltip. So we're going to need to override that. So let's add another class to this button of tooltip-close. And we'll add some style for that. So I'll jump down to the style section and I'll just collapse this arrow selector and this text selector. And we'll place this here. So I'll add and-close to target this button. And we'll set pointer events to all and save that. And let's see if we can click on it now. And yeah, we can now click on this button. And I don't know why it's moving a little bit when we click on the close button, but maybe we can fix that by adding .prevent to our click handler when we add a click handler to this close button. So I'm going to jump to this button and add a click handler. So at click, and we'll add .prevent, and we'll fire a method called close tooltip. And we need to create this method. So I'm going to add another block comment here. And I'll just put close tooltip. And we'll set up our close tooltip method. So const close tooltip equals a method. We'll just log out close tooltip for now, make sure that's working. We need to return this as well. So we'll add that here, close tooltip, save that, reload, show the tooltip and click the button. We can see close tooltip being fired. And this tooltip is still moving when we click the button. I don't know why that's happening. Well, maybe it'll stop happening when we actually hide this tooltip when we close it. And to hide it, we can just do exactly what we did here. Just fire the hide method on this tooltip ref value, which is attached to the QTooltip component. So we can just do tooltipref.value.hide, and I'll save that. And let's see if it's hiding. I'll reload. Click on the button and click on the close button, and we see the tooltip hide. And it's also no longer nudging over to the right as well, which is good. Let's finish off this badass tooltip by making our background color and text color customizable. So first, let's set up some props for background color and color. So I'll add a new prop called BG color. And this is going to be a string, and we'll set the default value to the color we've been using, which is gray-10. So I'll set the default to gray-10. And let's add another prop for our color, for the text color, This is also going to be a string, and we'll set the default to white. We need to make sure our elements are using these props, because right now we have these hard-coded classes, bg gray 10, and we don't currently have a class for the text color. That must just be coming from the Quasar tooltip component. So let's remove this bg gray 10 from the class attribute, and instead we'll bind to the class attribute and output bg dash and then whatever's in the bg color prop. So dollar curly braces and bg color, and we need to do the same thing on our arrow div. In fact, I'm going to make this a self-closing div, split the attributes, bind to the, in fact I'll just copy this class attribute, paste it there, and remove this hard-coded class. We also want to add our text color class to the tooltip text div. So we'll add that here. So text dash, and then we'll spit out the color prop and save that. Let's make sure our tooltips still look okay. And if we just change these classes, I'll change that to red 10. Let's say blue, save that. And yeah, that seems to be updating. So let's change these back to white and gray-10. So let's add a bunch of tooltips to our page with different colors. So I'm going to jump back to index.view. I'll copy one of these heading divs, paste that to the bottom, change the text to custom colors. I'm just going to grab the first Q button and tooltip, paste that here and save that. So let's create a tooltip with a white background and black text. So I'm going to change the label on this button to white and black. We'll jump to our tooltip and set the BG color to white and the color to black. Save that. And that's working. Let's do a white and pink tooltip. So I'll duplicate this Q button and tooltip, change the label in the button to white and pink, change the color prop to pink, save that. We can see white and pink. Let's do a red and white tooltip. So I'll duplicate these again, change the label in the button to red and white, change the BG color to red and the color to white, save that. We can see that. Let's do a purple and white one. So again, I'll duplicate these, change the label on the button to purple and white, change the BG color to purple, save that. And that's looking good. We can also, of course, use all of the colors from our theme. So primary, secondary, positive, and negative. So let's add those as well. So I'll set the label to primary, set the BG color to primary, save that. We'll do secondary, change the label to secondary, change the BG color to secondary. Let's do the positive, change the label to positive, change the BG color to positive. Let's do negative as well. So I'll update the label to negative and the BG color to negative as well. Save that. We can now see tooltips made up of our theme colors. You can grab the source code for this tooltip at dannys.link/badass-tooltip code, and I'll put the link in the description. Let me know in the comments if you would do anything differently with this tooltip component, or if you can think of any other ways we can improve this component. Please hover over my face over there if you don't want to miss any of the videos in this series. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.